It makes up around 1/6 of the global economy. But as the US and China continue to assert their power, Europe's influence may be in danger of shrinking. Does Europe risk sliding into irrelevance? I'm Hazem Seeker, and this is the Newsmakers. It was once the center of global power, but in an era of deal-making, Europe now finds its voice increasingly drowned out by the power brokers of the United States and China. From technology to defense, trade, and diplomacy, the continent faces a defining question. Can Europe still shape the world, or is its influence slipping away? We look at the forces reshaping global power and what's at stake for Europe's future.
Battle lines for a new world order based on power are being drawn right now. A new Europe must emerge.
The engines of European technological progress might be sputtering and potentially flaming out, as many European national and EU leaders worry that Europe might be asleep at the wheel in technological, industrial and defence terms, while China and the US race ahead. Car manufacturing, particularly in Germany, has been a totem European industry for decades. But demand for batteries and electric vehicles more generally has grown in recent years. EU manufacturers have struggled to keep up production and rely heavily on imports from China. China now dominates global electric car sales as the European car industry struggles to keep pace. China also has a near stranglehold on global supplies of several key minerals and rare earths needed for electric cars, as well as a wide variety of other tech. French President Emmanuel Macron spoke against Europe sliding into a superpower vassal of the US and China, and of the need for Europe to back itself.
Our top priority as governments, but as well as large companies, large European companies, is to have a European preference agenda. Because guess what? The Chinese have a Chinese exclusivity as soon as they can, and the Americans have a very strong American preference. Sometimes in the regulations, but most of the time in the practice. We are the only place where there is never a European preference, not to say a fascination for non-European solutions sometimes.
But it's not just cars and minerals. Europe accounts for only 10% of the global space economy in terms of public funding, compared to 60% in the US and 15% in China.
In relative terms, it's decreasing, and that worries me because I know that we have an excellent industry, we have excellent capacities in Europe, but if our global share is decreasing, there's a very high risk that the best people, the best companies will leave Europe. They will go to Silicon Valley, they will go to UAE, they will go to Japan or other countries. And this is something that is really highly dangerous and is a big risk for Europe.
But beyond space and cars, and beyond China, Europe has depended on the US for software, IT, and app developments. When Europeans use social media apps, search engines, or software, the chances are highly likely it's an American company like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, or WhatsApp, or even a Chinese one like TikTok, Huawei, Alibaba, Shein, or Temu. And for decades, US backing has underpinned European security and defense. But the transactional nature of Donald Trump's foreign policies on trade, tariffs, and even NATO defense has left European leaders scrambling to increase spending. Russia's war in Ukraine is seen as a harbinger of worse things to come if Europe doesn't fortify its own defensive strategy. Let China sleep, for when she wakes, she shall shake the world. It's a quote that is historically attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte and has attracted a near mythical status when observing European perspectives on China throughout history. And now that prediction is playing out with ramifications across the world. As China rises and the US apparently becomes more indifferent, Has Europe left itself wide open to the whims of the waking giant to its east and to its ally across the Atlantic?
Well, joining me now to discuss this further from Beijing, we have Senior Fellow at the Thai Institute and Chairperson of Asia Narratives, Ina Tangen. From London, Professor at the European Institute at the London School of Economics and Political Science, Ian Begg. And joining us from Washington, Executive Vice President for Research and Policy at the Institute of International Finance, Clay Lowry. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Ian Begg, let me start with you. What brought Europe to this point, and where do you see its place in the world right now?
Well, in spite of all the gloom, I think we should quote Mark Twain here. Rumors of Europe's demise are greatly exaggerated. The European Union is slightly smaller as an economy than the United States. It's falling further behind China, which has been growing very dramatically. But if you throw in other significant European countries, including Turkey and the UK, Switzerland, and so on, you find that Europe as an economy is on the same level as the United States, maybe even slightly bigger, and remains an active market. It's still a big trading entity. So the idea that Europe is sliding into irrelevance or is not doing well is misplaced. It's true to say that it's lagging behind in some of the high-tech industries, and its economic growth over the last decade or so has been highly disappointing. But it's a long way from being dead and out.
Clay Lowry, what's your view on this? And when we look at what's been happening in the headlines over the past few months with the negotiations over Ukraine and the sense that Europe is being sidelined on this, the way that the US was seen to have kind of strong-armed the EU in the trade negotiations. Do we make too much of that, or does Europe need to do more here to kind of assert itself?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I tend to agree with Ian's characterization of Europe. I think that people have over-dramatized how much it has declined. If you look at actually just on a per capita GDP growth basis over the last 25 years, it's essentially kept up with the United States. There's been a little bit of a break over the last few years. I think that the issue from an economics perspective is about competitiveness and productivity. And that's where I think Europe really needs to have its focus. To be a little more succinct to your direct question, I think that, look, there's been change, and there's been a lot of change that has happened to Europe. And because of that, Europe is adapting to these positions. The one you just mentioned was whether or not you have a new president in the United States, Donald Trump. He's been there for a while. He has a different view on how to actually engage with not just Europe, but with the rest of the world as well. And Europe is adapting to that. And some of it at times is going to be problematic, and it's going to suggest that Europe's not doing so well. But I think some of it is actually suggesting that Europe is trying to figure out, hey, this is a catalyst. We need to kind of seize the moment. And I think that Europe's trying to do that. Now, can they take a plan and put it into action? I think that's a very big issue that we'll probably address more as this discussion continues.
Sure, we certainly hope to. Ina Tangen, what's your take on this? And there's a perception as well in comparisons with China, because of China has this centralized government, central planning, is able to make more long-term decisions. Should Europe strive to make itself a more cohesive bloc in order to be more nimble and to make decisions more quickly?
I don't think it's about being nimble or quick. It's about having a direction. I mean, quite frankly, I disagree with my two colleagues. The fact is that Europe is half pregnant. It cannot seem to unite itself around any political or economic issue other than Ukraine. And that is not one that is going very well. So at this point, with a higher base for energy, with divided nations, with populists kind of on the fringes, selling this idea that Europe needs to concentrate on itself, it's in disarray. And I don't say that with any kind of glee. You can talk about economic development, things like that, but the fact is, if you take the G7 countries, they lag behind the rest of the world in terms of GDP growth over the last 10, 12 years. And the reason is they've just have not been competitive. Donald Trump has been pure poison for Europe. This whole issue about Russia and Ukraine, well, let's go back to the time that you had Howard Baker telling people in the Kremlin directly, on quote, and documented, that the U.S. would not move 1 inch into the former Soviet sphere. Obviously, that did not come true. So at this point, Europe is reduced to kowtowing to the United States. When you have one of your senior leaders going on saying "daddy" to Donald Trump, who is not interested, has no empathy for Europe, I think it's really telling.
Ian Begg, what's your response to some of that? Is Europe had been seen to be kowtowing too much to the United States?
I think Europe has been struggling to figure out how to deal with Trump, but then so has the rest of the world, because he's quixotic. He uses tariffs not just as a device for altering trade patterns, but to exert coercion in other parts of the world. We've seen tariffs of a phenomenal level imposed on China and then withdrawn. We've seen tariffs at a very high rate imposed on Switzerland and then eased back. So it's an unusual style of dealing with the rest of the world. Now, Einar is certainly correct that Europe has a problem with productivity, that it needs to deal with the slow growth that it's endured over the last decade. And it's often a mistake to think of Europe as being an integrated political or economic space. We have the European Union, but if you excuse a play with words, it's not a United States of Europe, it's a united Europe of states. And the way around I put it is significant, because individual states in the European Union are what count most in foreign policy and in other policies. Germany, France, Italy, Spain, these are the big countries in the European Union. And then outside, as I mentioned earlier, you have Turkey, the United Kingdom, and smaller scale, Switzerland and others. So it lacks coherence because its member states do not want the European Union to have great power. To give one simple example, its budget, the EU level budget, is 1% of GDP, and the United States is 23%.
Clay Lowry, do you think that's part of the problem in the 21st century? Is the kind of the lack of a cohesive bloc, that perhaps it needs a United States of Europe, if you like, to better compete in the world?
Well, let's break this down a little bit. First of all, Einar basically said that Europe is half pregnant. I believe that's the term he used. Okay, well, what does pregnancy mean? Pregnancy means that you're going to birth something. Okay, but you're at the same time, you're slow because your body is changing shape and so forth. So, all right, so let's think about what has happened to Europe to get itself half pregnant. Over the last few years, what we've seen is Russia has invaded Ukraine right on Europe's doorstep. There has been a fall off in productivity and competitiveness, which probably has been captured best by Mario Draghi's report that came out roughly a year ago. And then third is that and Einar and Ian have both talked about this, which is the unpredictability of the United States towards Europe, and how it is changing, or at least it looks like it's changing, trade, supply chains, etc. All of those things lead towards a catalyst, and a catalyst that can actually drive Europe. Now, what is that catalyst going to have to take? One, Europe has to address, it's got serious issues on energy issues, it has serious issues on defense issues, it has serious issues on technological development issues and competitiveness, and it has serious issues in terms of building out its infrastructure. There are ways to address this, and I think Europe is trying to do that. And some of it is done at the individual state level, some of the issues that you see around Germany and other countries. And some of it is being tried to be done at the kind of more united Europe level. And I think that that is kind of where Europe needs to keep going. So I think that the idea, I don't consider it to be a done deal, that this is not going to happen. I consider it to be a half pregnancy, which is basically there is a possibility of rebirth and so forth going forward. And so so in that respect, I have a lot of optimism towards Europe. That doesn't mean that there aren't problems. Of course, there are problems. And you look at, and France has political gridlock. Germany has got a lot of significant problems. At the same time, Spain's pretty much growing pretty well. Poland has grown pretty well. Czech has grown pretty well. So Europe is a diverse place, and I think that actually they seem to have a lot of things going for it, but there are problems, as both Einar and Ian have pointed out, and hopefully I pointed out as well. But that doesn't mean there isn't some optimism.
Einar Tangen, what do you think Europe should be doing then, should be doing more of that it isn't doing now to stay relevant, if I could put it that way?
Well, first, Clay, understand that it's an impossibility to be half pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not, but you cannot be half pregnant. So the analogy is that Europe is in an impossible situation vis-a-vis the United States, especially. So what I would suggest is that Europe grow a spine, that they come together, not as creating a new organization, but simply get together with BRICS, Mercosur, the African Union, ASEAN, and march down to tell Donald Trump, if he doesn't want to see them in person, that the fact is that he has to stop this kind of colonial game of trying to pit countries against each other to gain his favor. There is nothing that the U.S. is doing in this America First policy that says that it respects international norms, laws, or institutions. And Europe has failed consistently to recognize it. They all feel it. I talk to many ambassadors, and they say, they privately grumble, but they say, well, we don't really have a choice because we need that protection umbrella. But there comes a point where the only way to deal with a bully is to be the bigger bully, to get together with everyone else. It's not a conspiracy against the U.S. This is simply telling rogue Donald Trump that he cannot continue this kind of silly game that he's playing. He's disrupting everything. Business is on a standstill because no one is going to invest money unless they can get it all out before Donald Trump leaves. And that's an almost impossibility when you start talking about anything long term. And that goes in Europe, it goes in Asia, Africa, South America, and the United States. And Clay, you mentioned a lot of issues about infrastructure, things like that. Well, I was a city and state official in the U.S. It was 20 years ago. We were already having major deficits there. We failed to address those issues. So this idea that somehow, Europe is the only one suffering, it's not. It's the people of Europe, and it's the people of America, and it's the people of the world. It's time for Europe to lead. And all is required is to get together with the other countries and say, enough, Donald Trump. This is not working for you or for the rest of us.
Ian Begg, is part of the problem then the deference, too much deference to Donald Trump's America? Does Europe need to grow a bigger spine, as Einar puts it there?
Yes and no. I think there's a danger of this conversation slipping into a discussion of Trump. And I'd throw out the number 36. Number 36 is the number of months Trump has left in power. So a bit like the Russians are doing with Ukraine, you can probably outweight Trump. Europe is reacting. It's building up its defense capabilities slowly and from a very low base, but it's going to get there. It's building up its attempts to try to kickstart its adverse competitive position by investing and by having a new competitiveness fund, which is maybe not huge at the moment, but the whole idea is to leverage in what is available through the individual country budgets, not just the European budget. There is change going on in Europe. And to say that Europe is unable to deal with Trump is, I think, a bit the same as looking at everywhere else around the world. maybe Xi Jinping has been able to stand up to Trump better than the European leaders because he has been able to respond with force in a way that other parts of the world, think of Canada, think of South Africa, and among the BRICS, Brazil has been unsure how to deal with Trump. It's a major problem for everybody else. But Europe is trying to move in the direction of a greater degree of autonomy, which I think will serve it well in 3 or 4 years' time.
Clay Lowry, if we focus on economics for a moment and we look at Europe's economic model, generally speaking, it is one of high taxes, strong social welfare, in contrast to the United States. Is that compatible, do you think, with staying competitive in the current global economy?
Well, I think it can be. I mean, look, there are countries within Europe that have the model you just mentioned. Actually, probably even more of the stereotype of the model, whether the Scandinavian countries, and they seem like they're not scared of competition. And I mean, it is interesting that one area in Europe where they actually have interacted with Donald Trump and the Trump administration on tariffs and trade policy is part of Europe's package, which I understand has come under significant criticism, was to actually lower tariffs on the United States. That is not a system that is scared of competition. That's a system that says we kind of welcome the competition because we want to see products come into Europe at a lower base. So in some respects, sometimes the United States might be the ones that are scared of competition. So I think that the model that they have in Europe can work, but there's things that need to be fixed. I mean, we've talked about some of them, but the idea right now of you have a group that tries to figure out how to regulate things before they've actually been innovated and invested in creates problems for that going forward. How do you get the right balance between risk and stability versus growth and competitiveness? And I think that there's been critique of Europe that is totally legitimate, that they have bent a little bit towards the let's worry about risk, let's worry about stability, and they have forgotten about economic growth and they have forgotten about competitiveness. And I think that some of the factors that Eisner and Ian have pointed out are actually catalyzing towards trying to address this. This doesn't mean it's going to happen like that. It means that it's going to happen, and that or there's an addressing of that problem. But does that mean that the European model of the one that you said is going to completely fall apart? No, not necessarily. It means that basically it needs to adapt and change. And part of it is to adapt to my country, the United States, which is changing how they interact with Europe, largely because of Donald Trump, but not solely because of Donald Trump. So I want to be careful about that. So I think that Europe has a chance to be able to continue to have some of its model, but that model will, if they do not address the competitiveness and productivity, which is what Mario Draghi was saying a year ago, then that is where they're going to run into problems. So I think that the fact that they're trying to do that, it's whether or not can they see it through and find implementation and execution on those issues. Some of those issues, by the way, have absolutely nothing to do with the United States and very little to do, frankly, with Asia. It has to do internally within Europe. And in fact, if we got, better use of capital markets, competitiveness within Europe, and trade and services and so forth to kind of come down, the barriers to trade, that would actually improve productivity as much as some of the other things we've been discussing.
Ina Tangen, one of the things that China has been able to do better than Europe is build up its own tech industry, whereas Europe is very much reliant on US technology. Is that something, from your perspective, that they need to focus on more? And is that something that would also benefit China?
Oh, absolutely. China's not afraid of competition. They have a lot of things on their side. They have the human resources, the number of engineers that they graduate, the sheer number of people that they have. But they do successfully, so far, are able to set national priorities and then to use the market to drive them. So this idea that it can't work is nonsense. It doesn't work for all systems, but for China, it has been working, and you can't deny that in terms of the progress that they've made, given that they had no resources, no big amounts of capital or anything like that, and they've emerged over this past some odd years as number one country in purchasing power parity, and number two in real terms, dollar terms. But this idea that the market is going to solve everything, Clay, I'd have to disagree with you. If you look at American industry, my family was in American industry. We built submarines during World War II and things like this. Fact is that almost all the segments are dominated by 2 or 3 major players. And instead of going after them and trying to encourage competitiveness, what you've been talking about, in actuality, it's going the other way. They're being protected. If you want a free market, you have to bust up these large combines, which do not compete for business. What they do is they tax people to use what they have to offer. So I think you're prescribing something that the US is not practicing. And I think that is part of the problem. In terms of Europe, Europe does have a future as long as it can come together and it can separate its policies from the United States. The United States, we're not interested in Europe.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Fascinating discussion. We could certainly spend a lot more time talking about it, but unfortunately we are out of time. Thank you very much to all three of you, Ina Tangen, Ian Begg, and Clay Lowry. And thank you for watching. Remember, you can follow us on social media and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Hazem Seeker. We'll see you next time.